Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Jewish Professionals Podcast, the JP Podcast. I'm Hillel Bainach.
And I'm Benjamin Winters, and we're students at Yeshiva University, just looking for some advice.
Our aim is to bring to you Jewish professionals from every industry to learn from their successes and failures, how they grew in their career and Jewish identity, and made a Kiddush Hashem along the way.
We hope you can apply what you learned through the lessons to your own life as they pass the torch to us, the next generation. We can't wait to go along this journey with you. This is the Jewish Professionals Podcast.
Woo! Where this is exciting, Ben. Another episode of the Jewish Professionals Podcast. Woo! The JP Podcast. Ben thinks it's funny.
I'm making fun of the intro every single time to our podcast, which I've gotten so many comments on. Similar to my other intro, which I said big time, but I think you get made fun of more for that intro.
It could be, but it's an exciting time right now. Coming back from Pesach break, summer on the horizon, NBA playoffs getting started. This is pretty devastating for me, Ben, as a Mavs fan.
Listen, I actually want you to describe your feeling when you saw the trade. I don't know if you were awake it was like, what, 11:30?
I'll tell you what, I was just in Dallas, and there's a name that just won't be spoken. It's like almost like Voldemort. You won't say the name. And starts with Nico, ends with Harrison. But it's an exciting time. Some playoff teams doing well. The Bucks, game 3 is a big game tomorrow night. But I'm excited to present Moshe Weinberger. Ben, tell us a little bit about his career.
Yeah, Moshe, before we dive into just a quick overview for our listeners, you went to Penn, Harvard Business School, you were at Lehman Brothers, and then New York. Started your own hedge fund. And now you're doing a bunch of private things. Can't really find anything on you on the internet post 2018. You gone like zero dark 30 mode over here. So we pulled that together. But really appreciate you coming on and sharing some wisdom with us.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure to be on, and I'm sorry about the Luka trade. Yeah, no, it's you forgot that I went to Frisch.
Frisch.
A very, very important part of the foundation of my education. Just can't leave that out. It all started. Probably the smartest group of people I've been with in my life were my classmates at Frisch.
Not Penn, not Harvard.
Nope. Frisch was
Frisch.
The only time in my life where I would sit in a classroom and I could either look, this way or this way or this way or that way. There'd be 4 of us, and I knew for sure I was just not the smartest one. No way.
At Frisch, not at Penn, not at Harvard.
Nope. Yeah. Nope. I don't. Most of the time, I won't even be in the top 2. And this was in I had a very special class. Mm-hmm. Our highest honors class was really, really special, and it was amazing. We pushed each other. I thought, if I look at my journey through life, I felt it just kept getting easier and easier after I got out of high school.
Let's talk about that. So, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Teaneck, New Jersey,
okay.
Which was very different when I grew up. When I was growing up, you guys are going to laugh at this. We had no Eruv. There was one shul. We had no kosher restaurants.
Zero.
There was not one kosher restaurant when my mom didn't want to cook. The Sunday night out, we had 2 choices. We'd go all the way down to the Lower East Side at Shmulka Bernstein's, or the easier one is that we would come to the YU cafeteria.
No.
I promise you.
No.
I'm not making this up. And we were not the only Teaneck family to do this. The YU cafeteria, we would come in, it cost a couple bucks or $1 to do it, and we'd get our trays and we would go. And it was hysterical because there would often be YU MAC basketball games and there would not be one fan watching these games. There would be people running on the track on top of it. There was no Max Live. And so we might watch 5 minutes of the basketball game and then we would go home. That was our Sunday night activity. So I grew up in a very different Teaneck, and it was almost like a small town back then. And it exploded after there. Soon we had the first kosher restaurant was the Kosher Inn, which became Jerusalem Pizza, and it exploded. I went to it was called the Moriah School of Englewood back then, and after that I went to Frisch. When I was graduating from Frisch, I was thinking about where I wanted to go, and I had a really smart group of classmates who were all very, very goal oriented, and we all pushed each other. And I think out of the 106 kids that graduated, I think we had something like 30 kids ended up being doctors in my class. Some crazy number.
Wow.
Don't hold me to it. And I think we had 20-something kids that ended up going to either Ivy Leagues or MIT schools of that. And I thought I was interested in business. I wasn't sure. My parents basically told me I can go to Penn, Harvard, or Columbia because they had good Jewish communities and there would be kosher food and a minyan. And I went to check out all the schools and I really liked Penn and I applied to Penn and got in and went to Israel and I ended up spending a year learning yeshiva. It was the first year of Shari Mevaseret Zion.
Inaugural student over
We
here.
had 37 kids in
Wow.
our first year in Mevaseret.
Look at Frisch and look at Mevaseret.
I started Penn, and I spent a semester at Penn. I'll tell you the whole story, and then I loved it. It was awesome, and then I decided on a whim to go back and spend another semester at Mevaseret. So I ended up spending a year and a half in Mevaseret, but I did it after spending a semester first at Penn. And we don't have to get into all that. And then I came back and started this path down towards focusing on finance. And that's where I spent the rest of my time at Penn. So we can go from there.
Going back to high school, you mentioned you were with a really motivated group. Is that, you think, from your parents? That was just you guys pushing each other? You guys had role models in teachers, rabbis? Where did that come from? You said that special unit of people.
I can't explain it. I'm not going to name names, but it was a really smart group of people, and we all we were a bunch of stupid high school kids too, and we did a lot of stupid things, and we loved playing basketball and talking to girls and all the things that boys like to do, and we weren't really into the learning that much to the chagrin of a lot of our rabbis. There's a big change since we were there in Frisch. Most of our rabbis were much older than we were. It was harder to connect with them. There was more of an adversarial relationship that we had with them, and I think they've done a phenomenal job. Most of the Yeshiva League in hiring and both younger rabbis and rabbis that want to connect with the kids, and I think that's made a big difference.
I'll say that what I've noticed is it's kind of, you're the spring of growth. You go to Teaneck, it's massive now, it's fresh.
No, I'm not going to take any credit for any of that.
Them of us, I mean.
It was a special group of people, some of which are still some of my best friends. And when you're, I always find in life you want to be surrounded by smart, ambitious, goal-oriented people. And when I started high school, I wasn't thinking about college. I just assumed I was going to go to YU, which would have been great. My father went to my YU. My uncle went to YU. I have 5 brothers and sisters, and they all went to either YU or Stern. I was the only one that went to Penn. I think that really only happened because of my classmates and my good friends. And, it just became, all right, let's see how well we could do on our SATs. And then, all right, I was a pretty good test taker. It's a useless skill in real life, but I was really good at standardized tests. And so then the door opened and I figured, why not? Let's try something different and get out of the cocoon. And it was a great decision.
Such an important lesson, just how important your neighbors are, how important your friends are, the people you surround yourself with. What's that quote about your net worth is going to be the percentage?
I thought net worth is network. Is
that one too, but your net worth is the combination of your 5 closest friends.
Oh.
We'll get into it, but I think one of the best lessons I learned in business was my boss, my partner, my close friend, Jamie Dinan, who started York Capital, told me that one of the secrets to his success is that he really felt that A's hire A's. Okay, meaning people that are A's in life, they want to hire other A's and they want to be pushed and they want everyone that's working for them and around them to be as good as possible, and they're not challenged by smart people. They want it to be elevated. If you're a B and you're in charge, you hire C's so that you feel like an A. And if you're building a business or trying to do anything, and if you find yourself trying to surround yourself by people that make you feel better because you feel you are superior to them, either intellectually or athletically. I mean, you play basketball, you want to be surrounded by the, practice and scrimmage with the best players possible. You'll feel better about yourself if you're scrimmaging with the JV, but you'll get better if you're playing with the best players possible. And I think that's something in life. And I got lucky in high school that I was surrounded by, some very good friends, but that also were really smart and really driven. And I think we just started, kind of pushing each other.
So when you were at Penn, you said you went there, you knew going in you were interested in business?
No,
or you had
my mom pushed me really hard to be a doctor. She wanted to be a doctor. Mm-hmm. She gave it up to raise a wonderful family, and she She's had a great career. She's a special person, my mom. But, she kind of pushed us. I really wasn't sure if I was going to go into finance, and it took me 2 weeks. I took AP chemistry and calc. I was
in high school, right?
Yeah. So I got there, and, as soon as I took my first economics class, I realized, I had a passion for it. And, I think that it became very, very clear. And I really got the bug. This is a great story. We always have stories. And I have a son, 4 daughters and 1 son. My son, Danny, is graduating from Penn in a couple weeks. He's in Wharton right now. And he was going over his classes to pick for this semester. And we were going through it. And he had one of the classes was financial derivatives. I said, yes, take financial derivatives. He's like, okay. And we looked, I said, who's the professor? May I know him? He said, Domenico Cuoco, an Italian guy. And I said, no way. And it turns out that Domenico Cuoco was my corporate finance professor 33, 34 years ago when I started. I said, it can't be the same guy. And the reason it hit home, I said, you must take that class because, everyone that gets successful in something, there's usually, a moment, a person, or some way where it clicks. If you're a musician, it could be a song or a singer or something. If you're playing a sport, the first time you realize, wow, this is easy for me to shoot a hockey,
right.
puck. And for me, I was sitting in corporate finance with Domenico Cuoco, and we had the Tzvi and Bodhi corporate finance book. And the first lecture, I remember sitting next to my good friend Josh Newman, and it was just like, it was magic. It was gold. I mean, it sounds like this is the way people talk about, like, if they find a Rebbe. He was my first Rebbe. He was my finance Rebbe. And
Rabbi Cuoco.
Yeah, Domenico Cuoco. And
that's a great name.
Everything made sense to me. And when I thought about him, I thought he was this, 50-year-old genius that's been doing it forever. And this is why this story is funny. And, people ask about your mentors. And I'm like, yeah, in my mind, he was like the most important person. Because after that, I said, I'm going to make a career in this because this makes sense. I love it. I just need more of it. And I think I'm good at it. And I loved his class. And he had such a big impact on my life. And I said, Danny, take the class. So one of the things, I'm on the Wharton board. So I had a board meeting a few weeks ago. And I decided I was going to go sit in on Professor Cuoco's class. I had Danny ask him permission. He said, of course.
Vador, vador.
and I get there. And he's like a relatively young guy. I mean, in my mind, you probably think I'm ancient. I'm 50, and I see Professor Cuoco, and he looks really young. I'm going to guess he's probably about 60 years old now, and it like kind of blew my mind because that meant when I thought he was this giant, just giant of finance, he was like 27 or 28 years old. And I go to talk to him before the class, and I was like, I said, I should have reached out to you. You changed my life. You inspired me. Like, is there any chance you remember who I am? He says, no. He has no idea.
I was waiting for that.
He has no idea. Like, he's like, I've had thousands of students over the last 30 years. And
I was waiting for the tears, by the way. I was holding him back for the.
I thought he was going to pull out a picture from his wallet.
I knew you were always going to do amazing things.
No, but he really was just clear and concise, and it was important to us that he understood. And I was talking to it, and it was a nice full circle moment, sitting there with Danny and listening to his class, and I thought it was great. But again, it's one of the we can get into it later. One of the things that I really believe that having the right, sometimes you get lucky finding the right inspired people. So I had Professor Cuoco got me into finance. The path that I decided to go on was to go into investment banking because everyone told me that if you want to do anything in either private equity or hedge funds back then, you have to be a banker first because that's when you learn how to do the basic skills and you also get validated that you're a hard worker. And if Goldman or Harvard or Lehman hires you, then that's great. So I applied to the bulge bracket firms and I got a job at Lehman Brothers, and that was always. I remember it was always tricky. I got a job offer from Morgan Stanley, and you don't tell people back then that you were Shomer Shabbos because then there was this thought that you wouldn't that you wouldn't get hired because there was a 7-day-a-week job to be an investment banker. And I'll never forget. I got my Morgan Stanley guy called me up. I'd been through the whole thing. I'd been through all the interviews, all the rounds and the stuff. And he said, congratulations. We're so excited. We want you to join our class. And I said, oh, that's great. That's great news. That's great news. And I said, listen, I just want to tell you something. I don't think it's going to change anything. But I just want to let you know that I'm an Orthodox Jew and therefore I can't work on Saturdays. And there was like a silence in the line. And then he just said like, oh, I knew it. Like he had a feeling, like it was like he didn't say anything bad. He didn't say anything like, And I said, is that going to be a problem? And he said, no. We had another one a couple years ago and we figured it out. But the disappointment was tangible. It was like kind of the first lesson that I had that, people are going to judge you right off the bat, if you're going to be a little bit different. And you have to make a decision right then. Do you want to, lean into it, own up it, or are you going to, kind of hide it? And one of the things that my parents did everything right, but everyone called me Moshe until I was 17 years old. But my name on my birth certificate is Michael. And so when you applied to Penn and your standardized tests and everything, my real name was Michael. So starting in college, everyone started calling me Michael. And then I went into the business world and I was Michael. And almost everyone I've met from the age of 17 and on knows me as Michael. In the business world, I'm Michael Weinberger. If you Google me, I'm Michael Weinberger. Moshe Weinberger really doesn't exist except in some Jewish charitable world. And, so I then got a job offer from Lehman Brothers. And the guy who gave me the offer was a guy by the name of Mike Koenigsberg, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, who also became one of my mentors. And, he told me, and he was actually a Jewish guy, not religious at all. And I said, by the way, I can't, work on Saturdays. And he said, so? And I'm like, it's not a problem. He's like, get the job done. That's what we do here at Lehman Brothers. We get the job dne. I don't care how, I don't care when. And I said, okay, this is my type of place.
Right.
And
they should have clipped that. At Lehman Brothers, they get the job done. Not in 2008.
Well, no, I was long gone by then. So, that's, got to Lehman Brothers, worked for a couple of years. I was really, really fortunate that they picked me out to work in their nascent Israel group. You get hired as a generalist and you train, and then you could be, an M&A banker, you could be, an industrial banker, healthcare. And, they figured, oh, you speak a little Hebrew? Okay, great. We want you to be part of Israel. He's like, what does that mean? He's like, because back then in the mid 90s, Israel had the third most IPOs of any country in the world after the US and Canada, and technology was booming. They're like, yeah, are you willing to travel to Israel? So for the better part of 2 years, every 2 weeks, I was flying back and forth. I was like a gold Mead member, within when I was 20, literally 21 years old. I just graduated and I was going back and forth, and it was crazy because the group in the U.S., there was an Israel group based here and also in Tel Aviv. We had our Monday morning meeting that everyone had to be at 9:00 Monday morning. Israel week started on Sunday,
right?
And their Sunday morning meeting was 9 a.m. Israel time, which was 2 a.m. Saturday night. So I can't tell you how many nights I'd be on the 2 a.m. call. But there were nights that I went out and, we were out with friends, and then I'd find a payphone. There were no no one had cell phones back then. So we'd find literally a booth, and we'd leave, if we were at a restaurant or a bar or whatever it is. And I was like, and then I went into this, used our AT&T calling card, and I called this car for an hour from 2 to 3 a.m. on the thing. But it was an amazing experience.
You're like the opposite of all the people in Israel who are flying back and forth to America. You're like,
they're like, what's that DJ noise in the background, Michael?
I mean, there was such great and really just great experiences that I had. I had right off the bat, and Harvey Kruger, who was the vice chairman of the firm, also Israel was his pet project. He was the first American banker that really focused on helping bring Israel into the 20th century when it came to financing and corporate structuring. And he was the head of our group, and had an amazing 2 years. I can't imagine, but it was really hard work because, as I said, I made sure I listened to what Mike Koenigsberg said, and I said I wanted to make sure that I was the only Orthodox Jew in the Israel group. Well, there was one other one that was in the group who was a vice president, and he was already had more gravitas, so no one really questioned him. So I was I got in. I worked from Sunday until Friday until right before Shabbos, went home, and then every Saturday night, I
2 a.m.
came in, and then I would go out and I would meet my, I was married then to my wife, Ariane. I'd meet her in the city a little bit, and then I'd do the call, and then I'd come back and do it Sunday. And and I just, after a month, I don't think anyone ever even thought about it. I just got the work done, the best job possible. And, I was one of our higher rated analysts, and just didn't become a thing. No one thought about it. So
was investment banking back then, now that it's been so long, the same as it is right now? Basically long hours, constant like modeling and or was there? It's more of the same.
I think so. I mean, again, haven't been an analyst in 30-something years, so I can't really talk to it. But there was a lot of tedious, monotonous work. I mean, hours and hours that we'd have to work to put presentations together that they don't have to do today, like going to word processing, where you had to have these people that were experts in putting these pitch books together, and you had to wait till 2 a.m. and look at it. And if there was one little mistake, a comma, you had to do it all over again. Then you had to take it from word processing to printing, and then they would make lots of copies. So there was tedious stuff, which I think there is still today. But I was very fortunate that we had a very lean group, and I got a lot of exposure to different CEOs. And I got to meet Arik Sharon, who was the prime minister. The whole thing was great. And but listen, it's something that I can't advise anyone to do because it's just a horrible, horrible, use of your time. Everything is about just work all the time and just you eat to work and you sleep to work and it's not great, but all of a sudden you turn around and I don't know what it is today, but I learned a lot and I was exposed to people that I wouldn't have been exposed to, and I was trying to figure out what to do next, and I had an opportunity to stay at Lehman Brothers and be promoted, but I realized then I don't want to be an investment banker. I didn't want to be on the sell side. I didn't want to work for other people. I wanted to be on the other side of the capital. And so I applied to business school, which I didn't think I was going to do because I went to Wharton undergrad. And when I applied to business school, I only applied to one school. I applied to Harvard. And then I got in, and that was also very fortunate. And once I got to Harvard, I always joke that everything I learned about finance, I really learned in Wharton and on the job. And
in Frisch.
And in Frisch. Okay, good one. And you're listening. But the most important people I met, a lot of them were in the connections I made, and getting my resume validated happened by going to Harvard Business School. Because it's you go there and you're stamped, and people's all right, this person must have done something. And I was the youngest person in my Harvard Business School class of 800 and something people. They usually want you to work for 3 or 4 years, and I was 23 years old when I started Harvard Business School. And it was a wild time because this was the late 90s when everyone was, the internet was nascent. So everyone was excited about anything.com, all these startups and venture capital. And it was really a wild time to be around. I had friends that dropped out, took summer jobs at Harvard Business School at these startup.coms, like etoys.com and pets.com. And then on paper, by the end of the summer, they were literally worth millions of dollars, right? Because they got their stock grants.
Right,
and then,
the bubble.
And they dropped out of school, and they're like, all right, and go. And then 24 months later, they're finishing school or trying to find a job and trying to get back into a more real job. So there are a lot of lessons there. And I fell in love. I knew I wanted to be an investor. I loved investing. I loved stock picking. It was something that I wanted to. I never owned a stock in my life. I didn't have the money to do it, but I thought I'd be good at it. And, and I followed the markets and I did something, just differentiated, where everyone, or not everyone, most of the people in my class were a lot more interested in, like I said, in venture capital and private equity or going the banking route or McKinsey. And, I decided I wanted to go order a hedge fund, which was not in vogue then. It really just wasn't popular. It was like going to Mivaseret, I guess. And back then, the cool people at Kleinzak, I went to BMT, right? So to call back to one of your other podcasts.
He's not a Yeshiva League champ, though.
But it's true, 1991. There were like 10 of us interviewing for hedge fund jobs. And back then it was very different. There was no resume drop. There was no, so I literally had to write letters, word processors, and write letters to all the different hedge fund people that were out there saying, hey, I'm a smart guy, I want a hedge fund job. And, a lot of them called back. I'll never forget, I got a call back from Eddie Lambert. I wrote the first letter in October of the second year. And he's like, I liked your resume. He's like, I want to interview you. When would you be able to start if this works out? I'm like, well, I graduate in June. He's like, well, what are you wasting my time for? I need to hire someone now. And that was kind of the hedge fund world. It was like, we'll hire people when we need one. They didn't really hire a lot from business school, so it wasn't a natural fit. And at the end of the day, I got a little nervous because January was February. I had a 1-year-old kid. I didn't have a job. I had some loans that I had to pay back. But right around February, I ended up getting a few, job offers and or at least, interviews. And a couple of the big firms, Oxif and Perry Partner. Oxif was huge. It was one of the biggest hedge funds at $2.5 billion back then, which doesn't sound like a lot now, but it was huge. And Perry and then I got an unsolicited call from Jamie Dinan's assistant, and she said, "Okay, well, I work for York Capital, which I'd never heard of. It was this tiny fund, $300 million, much smaller than the other ones." He says, "Well, it's run by Jamie Dinan. I had no idea who he was." And he bought the resume book, which was actually a 800.
That was a thing back then?
It was a resume book. It was an actual book.
Yeah, paper LinkedIn.
Harvard Business School would sell their resume book. I don't even know how much it cost, for a few $100, and people would buy it. And you could then go through it and find, you would put your resume, you say who's interested in like investment management or healthcare or banking, and you could, they would have tabs like sorting it. And I guess she had the job of sorting through it and finding people that went to Wharton undergrad and then worked as an investment banker, are now at Harvard Business School, and are interested in working at hedge funds. And Jamie wanted to interview all of them.
She couldn't just apply those filters on LinkedIn, by the way.
No,
she
it
had
didn't
to
work.
single.
She had to go through them, and God bless that she did it. And I asked her why those, and she said, "Oh, because Jamie went to Wharton undergrad and then worked as an investment banker, and then went to Harvard Business School." And he said it worked for him. It's gonna it's work. And so it's great. And I got on the phone with Jamie, and I said, "All right," he's like, "All right, I want you to come to New York." And back then it was the thing. They would send you a train ticket, so you can go down from Harvard to go there. So I said, "All right," or they'll reimburse you. So I said, "Okay, you're going to reimburse me for my train ticket?" And he says, "Well, you told me you were interviewing with other people. Where are you interviewing with next week?" And I said, "Well, I'm interviewing with Oxif on Thursday." He's like, "Oh, okay, great. So they're paying for your train ticket down already, so you can just come and I'll interview on Friday." And I'm like, "Okay, yeah, that seems to work, for me." And which I realized, okay, this is a bootstrap type place. I kind of liked it a little bit. I went and I had my interview day with Oxif, and I really wasn't thinking I'd go to this. You don't go to Frisch and then Penn and Harvard and then go to York Capital that no one hears from. You go to one of the bigger places.
Yeah.
And I had a whole day interview, and Oxif was like magical, and they had like a cafeteria, and everyone had their offices, and everything was new and shiny. And amazing place, great people that worked there. I have friends that were working there. And I finished my day, and the guy who was interviewing me, I'm not going to say his name, was a tough guy. And he said, I think we really like you. I think, and one of my friends from Penn worked there. He's like, "I think you're the guy, but I just need a little bit more." He's like, "Could you come back in tomorrow morning?"
Uh-oh.
So I said to him, I'd love to. I said, but it was like, I don't know, it was like 5 o'clock. I'd been there since 9 o'clock in the morning. So they really put me through a lot. And I said, "Can I just stay later now? Let's just spend some more time now." And he says, "Nah, I got to get a train back to Westchester. Come in tomorrow." And I said, "I can't." He says, "What do you mean you can't?" I said, "I made a commitment. I'm going to another fund tomorrow." He says, "Which fund?" And I said, "York Capital." And he looks at me like I might as well have said I was going to go to like Iceland. And I'm like, he's like, "You're not going to come back here tomorrow because you're going to go meet with York Capital?" And he's like, and he's like, "What's his name? Jamie something?" And I'm like, "That." He's like, "Well, you're an idiot then, and I'm like, "Oh God, like, am I an idiot? I don't know." And I said, I said, "How about this?" I said, "I'll just skip class Monday. I'll come back in here Monday morning." He's like, No, I want you here tomorrow."
Oh, he wanted you to make the choice.
This is a straight up movie right here.
And I'm like, this is terrible. I'm like, I just didn't expect this. I thought like, I'd have an interview, I'd get a job offer. I wouldn't. I'd go to the next one. And, and I just remembered, my dad always used to say something to me from a very young age. And he always used to say, "Shem tov mi shemen tov." It's better to have a good name than to have oil or money or any of that. And I for some reason, right, like at that moment, it was going through my mind, and I stood up and I put my hand across the table. I said, "Well, I'm very sorry you feel that way, but I can't come in tomorrow." And he says, "I'm telling you right now, if you walk out of this room and don't come back tomorrow, you're done here. You'll never work at Oxif."
Wow.
And so I said, "All right, I guess I'm never going to work at Oxif." Okay. So like, and I'm like, it seems like a power move, but I was like, "Oh my God, did I just make the biggest mistake of my life?" And I walked out the door, and I got to the street, and I was in total panic mode. Again, I had I had a 1-year-old.
And you didn't know that Jamie was going to give you the offer either.
No, I know I did. Even then, like, no one's going to take your capital job over like Oxford or Perry, Harvard. I was talking to a lot of different places, but I made a commitment, and I said I was going to be there, and I was going to be there. And there were no BlackBerries. It was like I could say, give me a minute, and I'll text him or call him. But I did have a cell phone. I had like the StarTAC cell phone that I just bought. It was expensive because you needed it then at that point. And I was walking towards the subway, and as I was about to get in the subway, phone rings. And it was the guy from Oxif. And he said, okay. He's like, you passed the test. He's like, why don't you come back after you're done tomorrow?
Oh my
He
God.
goes, you passed the test?
Yeah.
How much do you think was you passed the test versus someone said to him, like, you just let him walk through the door?
I don't know what happened. I know
He was probably in shock.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll never know what happened. And I was like, okay, I'll come over as soon as I'm done tomorrow. And then I walked in the next day. I got to York, and I guess your viewers can't see. The entire office was the size of this room. It was tiny.
This is not a big room, by
Not
the
a
way.
big room. And it was not in a nice building. And, and there was like 6 or 7 people working there. And they were managing a few $100 million. And I sat down, and I had, right off the bat, like the difference was in Perry and Oxif, you started going up the ladder. And here I started right with Jamie. Jamie came in, and I sat down with Jamie for over an hour. And he just asking questions. It was great. It was like what you guys are trying to do to get me. I just try to get him talking, because I read somewhere that if you have an interview and you get the interviewer talking a lot,
Right.
He'll feel like he likes you because everyone likes talking. And it went well. And he was also just really an amazing person. And there was just an energy and a connection. And I thought, like, okay, this guy is real. And and okay, this could work. And then he says, all right, I'm going to send him my partner. I had one partner, Dan Schwartz, YU grad, actually. Dan comes in, and Dan's in there for about maybe 15 minutes. Okay, barely says anything. And then Dan leaves. And I'm like, okay, I guess this is over. Like, he didn't like me. Like, the guy walked out after 50. I came all the way from Boston. And, and then they sent in one other guy to interview me then, Alan Cohen. I had a good interview with him. We talked for 30 minutes. And then that was kind of it. That was like the firm at that time. It was like, 3, 4 guys. And Jamie comes back in. And, Jamie's like, so, like, what do you think? And I'm like, well, it doesn't matter. I'm like, I don't think it went well with Dan. And he's like, why do you say that? He's like, he left after 15 minutes. He's like, are you kidding me? He's like, Dan doesn't spend more than 5 or 10 minutes with anyone. That was the longest time I've ever spent with anybody. He's like, he really liked you. He's like, this is good. He's like, okay, let's talk about getting you. How are we going to get you to work here? And I'm like, wait, so like, this is a job offer now? He's like, yeah. Like, let's make this happen. You're going to be my first business school hire ever. And I'm like, I said, well, and I told him the Oxif story. I said, I got to go back there and finish that. He's like, okay. He's like, and then he's telling me, and I said, like, why should I come here? And he said something really smart. He's like, look, if you go to Oxif and they are hiring, how many analysts are they hiring this year? I said, I think they're hiring like 7 or 8. And he's like, and they have a class from last year. He's like, you're it. You're our guy. Okay? You're our guy. We're hiring 1. So if you want to make a bet on yourself, you come here. You're also making a bet on me, Jamie said, and Dan Schwartz, and you're making a bet on us. But if you really think you're good, and I think you're good, he's like, if you think you're good and you want to control your own destiny, he's like, you want to come here. It's like, because you go to Oxif, it's like, you're not going to be able to make a difference. And even if you are, it'll be harder. And I don't know, it really resonated.
I'm getting butterflies.
It really resonated. And I thought, like, okay, like this guy's telling me a good story. And then actually Dan came back in, and
More time for Dan, by the way.
if I had any questions for him, and I don't know, I forced like 1 or 2 questions. I got another 3 minutes out of Dan. Dan's a great guy. We're still very good friends to this day, but that's just
The phone calls don't go for very long.
No, it's more of a texter. And that was it. And I remember I went back, and I actually went back to Oxif, and they made fun of how was your morning, blah, blah, and I did the whole thing. And then back then you had these job offers. They expected you to tell them really quickly, like 24 hours, 48 hours, because if not, they're going to move on to the next one. So I had a few offers, sitting there, and I told him, and gosh, I'm spending a long time on this part of the segment. I don't know if
it's good,
but yeah, so like the York offer was so much less money than all my other offers. Like it was laughable. Like, the York offer was $80,000 and the other offer was like $125,000 salary. And the signing bonus, I remember, was like, $25,000 at York versus like 50. And the York one was payable on your first day, not like then. And like the other places were paying your moving expenses. And
you turned it all down.
And I called up Jamie. I'm like, just kidding. Do you pay my moving expenses? Like, you mentioned you have a bunch of brothers, right? He's like, like, I'll pay for the U-Haul. Okay. Get your brothers to help you move your stuff. I'm like, okay. And
Jamie didn't want to pay those little small fees. The train,
you had a bargain for the train too.
And it just, sometimes you just got to think this through. And I went home and I talked about my wife. My wife worked in equity research. So she knew, and she had never heard of York Capital. She had heard of all the other funds. He's like, you're not really thinking about this. And I'm like, I think I am. Like, would you be upset? And she said, no, whatever. And that's a whole nother podcast about finding the right partner that supports you in these things. But so I said, okay, I'm going to take this job. I'm like, but I'm going to get some more money out of this. I know how to do this. I'm like, and this was my first lesson on how not to negotiate. And so I remember I called. We had this little kitchen apartment in Boston. And a landline phone, and with long cords, you probably don't even know what it is. So I dialed and called Jamie. He picks up the phone. It was like, it was like 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and I said, "All right, Jamie, I got great news." He's like, "What is it?" He's like, "I'm going to accept your offer."
Don't tell him that.
And he played it totally cool. But I didn't know, as according to everyone else, he was like doing this, like on the desk. And
they know
he had made a side bet with the people there that I was going to come, and everyone else said, "Oh, once he walks out the door, he's never coming back." And
trusted his own guy.
And and so then, but I said, "Okay, but can we just talk about a few things?" I said, "Yeah, this was the salary." I said, "The other firm was offering, they're like, can you do anything about it?" I was like, "Nope." I'm like, no. And the signing bonus is like, "No, this is the signing bonus." And I'm like, and of course I told my wife, don't worry about it. I'm going to get more money out of it because they're going to be so happy to have me, because you don't accept the job and then negotiate.
You dealt your cards already.
Really bad job by me. And then
should have sent your wife in there.
And so it's becoming very clear that this is not going my way. And as he's doing it, I'm like getting further and further away from my wife with the phone like wrapped.
They're whispering.
I'm like, I need a win here, and I need something. I got to go. He says, okay. He's like, you tell me you're a big Yankee fan. He's like, yeah. He's like, tell you this. He's like, the Yankees go to the World Series this year. He's like, I'll get you 2 front row seats to the World Series game. I'm like,
if they go.
I'm like, deal. Okay. And he's like, all right, can't wait till you start. See you in June. Like, this was more, I hang up the phone. My wife said, how'd it go? I'm like, amazing. I'm so happy. I'm going to work at York Capital. He's like, well, what about like the signing bonus? I was like, no, you didn't get any of that stuff. But me and you, we're going to be sitting front row, Yankee Stadium, if the Yankees make the World Series this year.
How'd they do that, yeah?
So she looked at me like, she's ready to kill me, right? So, and the funny part was that 6 months later, it was the Subway Series of Mets
Oh
Yankees.
my gosh, you can't write a better movie.
It was the most expensive ticket. And
he backtracked. He's like, what did I do?
I said, Jamie's trying, wait, what did I say? I was like, you said front row, and
book it.
And he was a man of his word. He spent, back then it was like $1,000. It was huge. Like, the money was huge. And he bought me the tickets.
He took out a mortgage.
Thankfully, I did very well in the first few months at York, so he felt good about it. But it bothered him because, I remember 10 years later or 15 years at his 50th birthday, he still was talking about how much money he had to spend on those tickets.
Have you ever seen the movie Air, Moshe? About convincing Michael Jordan to sign with Nike.
Yes, I saw
It's exactly what it was. It was like Nike was this like little pop-up shop, and they had Adidas and all these shoe companies vying for him.
But Jamie was right. Dan was right. It was the best decision I ever made. I was able to come in there and right from the get-go, had a lot more rope, had a lot more authority. They kept letting me, and I worked really, really hard. And that's, I became, a very young partner at York. And
can we talk a little about what does York exactly do for our audience?
Okay, well, York doesn't exist anymore. It shut down about 5 years ago, but it was a multi-strategy hedge fund. So we invested across many different platforms. We'd had an event-driven business and an equity business. I ended up being the senior partner in charge of all of our equities. We had a European business investing in both equities and distressed, and we had a distressed business. And then as time went on, we had a few other we grew. I mean, by the time I left York in the end of 2015, we had grown from $300 million to $26 billion. So we had a couple.
That's a multiple. Wait, so let's hone in on equities. What exactly does it mean? Does it entail to invest in equities?
I was a stock picker, and that's about as plainly as you can get. I just tried to find different stocks, which is another word for equities, that I thought had asymmetric or risk rewards that were very good, and you could bet both going long companies and betting on their success, and you could also short companies and betting on their failure and their stock prices to go down. And even within equities, there's different ways. There's the event-driven world, and there's the arbitrage world, and there's just there's long bias. But we had a bunch of strategy, and I was in charge of that business. But and I had a whole team of people that were working for me, and we built a portfolio of equities. And over time, I did work in Europe. In the beginning, we were all doing everything, including I would buy bagels. The bagel story is a good story. I don't know how much time we have, but
we got all the time. The time you have.
So in the first week I was there, there were, again, I think there were 8 of us in the office, and Eddie Zatorsky, who's a good friend of mine, was our head trader, and he lived in Bay Ridge, and Friday morning came, and he would bring in bagels for the whole office, which was like a dozen bagels that he would bring in, and some cream cheese, and it was great. He did it on the first, and then the second week I was there, Eddie had a destination wedding that he had to go to, so he was away. So, he just kind of said, all right, I guess, you should order bagels in. He told Veronica, one of the assistants, because I'm not going to be here from Essa Bagel. And I said, well, if you want, I'll get bagels. I'll buy bagels for the office. And he says, well, do they have good bagels? I said, yeah, hot bagels and Teaneck are really good bagels.
Kosher bagels, bring them from Locks and cream cheese.
And I thought also this is a good thing. I could bring in kosher bagels, and then I'd be able to eat it too. And so he said, go for it. So
Teaneck is starting to build its repertoire of eateries.
I bought a dozen hot bagels, and I brought them in, and everyone loved the bagels.
That's what Jews do right. Okay. That's what we do right.
The bagels.
And, Eddie had been bringing bagels for years, and Eddie comes back, and the next Thursday, and they're like, Jamie's like, okay, Eddie, we got to talk. She's like, you're no longer bringing in the bagels. The new guy's bringing in the bagels. Like, right off the bat.
I know. It's like, sit down. You got to come to my office. No more bagels.
No more bagels. And the truth is, I think Eddie was okay with it. And so I started bringing the bagels, and I brought in the bagels every single Friday from the time I started. For almost 16 years, I brought them in every Friday. And by the end, the office had grown to, we had like 200 people in our office.
It's a lot of bagels.
So like at Teaneck Hot Bagels, there was like a standing order. I would get there, I would go around the back, and he would bring in like, giant bags. We had to bring 200 bagels in. So that was, that was the big, and I remember it was, I remember asking Eddie in the very beginning, I didn't have a lot of money. And I was like, so do they reimburse you for the bagels? No, they would just buy the bagels. By then I'm like, yeah, what did it cost? Nothing. And then there was a point where I was spending so much money on bagels that,
you got to go in.
But thankfully by then I could afford buying the bagels. But, but that's one of the, one of the things that when young people ask me, like, what am I supposed to do when I start a new job? Or what am I, like, how do I add value? And I always say, like, Danny, my son, hates when I give this analogy, but it's so true, and it's how I learned. He said, you want to make yourself very important in doing something that if you get hit by a bus and can't come into the office, everyone's like, oh no, like, Michael Weinberger's not here, what are we going to do? You don't want to be, oh, he got hit by a bus? That kind of sucks for his wife and kids, but like, all right, let's go. Let's move on. Next man up. Mm-hmm. And no matter the job you're doing, and like, I realized early on, like, if I got really good bagels, even if I didn't know what I was doing on the investing side, like, I'll have some value there. And, I started bringing in the bagels, and then, but every step of the way, you try to figure out how to become really indispensable in what you're doing and try to take on more responsibility, figure it out, do more, not just what you're asked for. You want to take things away from other people so that you're doing it so that they need you and do it well. But all right, ask some questions.
That's some internship advice that we've never gotten here. Bring the bagels.
Bring the bagels.
Bring the bagels. That's a good. I really wanted to hone in because I have a few friends who, some of them play on the basketball team, are big investors. Shout out Effie Freundlich, big investors. And I want to know, what was your process when you were stock picking? What did you look
You
at?
want to get deep in the weeds. I thought it was
okay.
just story time.
Oh no, we're getting into the weeds.
We got
here.
a professional audience too.
My process, again, I thought my job was buying mispriced risk. Okay. And what I mean by that is at the end of the day, if people think that something has no risk, okay, and there's a lot of upside, people are going to own it, and it's going to be very expensive, and it's going to trade very high, right? And that if people are really scared of owning something, okay, they're going to have ascribe too much risk for it, and they're going to sell it, and it's going to be very low. Now, that doesn't mean that you just want to buy everything that there's a lot, because very often people are right, and there's a risk for a reason, and it's like owning BlackBerry when Apple comes out, and it's going to go, it's going to go away, or Netscape, or AOL, or any of those things. So, I always try to find the key that I always said is it's asymmetry. Let's try to find investment ideas that I thought were, if we're right, we'll make 3, and if we're wrong, we'll lose 1. And that was, if I could sum down the process to that, it's having a variant perception. You can't just listen to what everyone else is doing, because if that's where it's not always going against the grain, but not being afraid to think about it yourself. Think about, all right, what is the real upside? What's the downside? Or this is what people are afraid of. This is the risk they're assigned to it. Are they right about that? And are they right about the upside? And you have to kind of get a flavor of what people are thinking, but you have to have your own opinion. And what's great about, there are a lot of great things about the hedge fund business, a lot of terrible things about it. But what I always liked is that you didn't have to bet 1,000. You didn't have to bet 90. You could be right. You could be wrong 45% of the time and be a genius investor. And there's a trick to it. The trick is if you're right 55% of the time, but you size your winners the right way, you're bigger in your winners and you're small in your losers, and also that the amount of money you make with your winners is so much more than your losers, and you recognize and you're intellectually honest when something's going wrong, that you're supposed to sell before you have very big losses. So one of the things I walked in every single day, and I looked at my portfolio and I asked myself this question: would I buy these stocks again? And if the answer was no, you sold them. And if the answer was yes, and maybe we liked them more, maybe we're supposed to buy more. And if you really are, because there's all these bad investing, emotions are, I can give you, there's only one decision in your entire life that you're supposed to let emotion overtake intellect. You know what that is?
Marriage?
Bingo. Okay? People are in your whole shidduch world and trying to figure out the perfect family. I don't want to marry them if he's from,
right, they make it mechanical.
It's terrible, okay? Because if there's one, I could do a whole podcast on
we can get into relationships too. I need some advice.
Relationships.
The Jewish Professionals Relationships Podcast.
The only thing that matters is, do you want to spend your whole life with this person? And that's emotion. You can't put logic to it. If you want to be a good investor, you've got to take emotion out of it. It's the most dangerous thing. And not just in the hedge fund world, in almost any decision you're going to make. You can running a professional sports team, you get caught up on how good someone was, last year. Next thing you know, you're signing Ryan Howard to this giant contract and he's terrible, or,
or trading away Luka Doncic,
That's, sorry. You need some therapy. So I try to be as intellectually honest in my decision making, and it didn't matter if I bought something and I looked at the new information and it told me that I was wrong and I was down 5%. I didn't ever say okay, let me just get back to even and then I'll sell, or let's just make it back because I don't want to go to Jamie. I don't want to go to my boss and tell him I made a mistake, early on. Or oh my God, I just was on TV on CNBC and I pitched the stock, or I was at, a conference I did, and now how does it look if 2 weeks later I'm selling it? There are all these things that are emotional reasons not to make a good decision, and you've got to block it all out and just ask that question again. If I didn't own it, if I didn't tell 3 friends to buy it, if I didn't go on TV and say it was my favorite idea, if I didn't tell my boss I had high conviction, and it turns out that I have new information that tells me I was wrong,
right,
would I be buying it today? And if the answer is no, you got to sell it. And that's it. You take your loss, you take your failure, you learn from it, and you move on.
Right. Swallow your pride. Swallow your pride. Go to the next one.
I mean, if I were your podcasters, you ask what's the one lesson of the hedge fund world that you could take into your real life, or or I don't know. Oh, you should ask the question.
That's our question. It's funny. We have a question on our podcast that what's one skill or experience / lesson.
You must be listening. I don't believe that. You must have listened
from
to some of
the
the episodes.
specific industry that applies to everyone.
It's failure. I learned how to fail by investing in stocks and being at a hedge fund. Because like I said, it's like being a baseball player where you fail 70% of the time. You fail all the time. And you could either get caught up emotionally in the fact that you're wrong so often, or you could realize, wait a minute, I'm in a job where I could be wrong 40% of the time. That's a lot, and still be a superstar if I do it the right way and I don't get caught up in these failures. And there's a lot of that to life too. Like it doesn't matter what you're doing if you get caught up in your failure. If you ask me right now, could you tell me your 10 biggest investment winners right now? I'll remember the first 2 or 3. I just struggle after that. But if you ask me to tell me like the 10 biggest losses and screw ups, not only would I remember it, I'd remember the prices we bought it at, my thought process, where I made my mistakes, how I did it, how dumb was I, how I got, like, what were the confirmation biases and other problems I had. You learn so much more from your mistakes in life than you do from your successes.
It's so interesting because they always ask NBA players, you lost that championship, but you won this one. Aren't you happy? And they said, I forgot who said this. Probably Kobe, right?
Probably Kobe.
Yeah, it's probably Kobe, but he said it.
That's your guy.
He said the losses hurt way more than the wins feel good.
Right. They say get people who hate losing more than they like winning. But it's interesting because the human, you're hitting on, I feel like, a really deep psychological point, which is the human brain is so much more like centered around focusing on the failures and the losses. And if you can take that and use it to motivate you and not get caught up on it, then that's not only a lesson for the hedge fund business, that's your whole life right there. Yeah. And not letting anything just sort of pull you back.
Be humble. Like it's just everyone. There's no straight lineup. I'm a big life learner, and I've studied a lot of people. And I don't care if you're Steve Jobs or you could go on. It doesn't matter. Every hedge fund, nothing great in this world ever happened without a ton of hard work, a lot of frustration, and a lot of setbacks. And I was fortunate to be in a business where, that taught me at a young age. I'm gonna make mistakes, and how you react to the mistakes. You can't make up for it right away. It's like they say you can't hit like a 5-run homer. You just have to go and try to be a little bit better tomorrow, make better decisions. And if you don't accept that, failure is part of the process, and accept that we're all human, we make mistakes, and if you ignore it, if you don't do a postmortem and figure out why you were making those mistakes, you're not gonna better. But I pride myself. I thought I was pretty good at not making the same mistakes twice. I found new and creative mistakes to make to lose money over the years, but that's something else.
Can we touch on? I know we talked a little bit before the podcast about your championship win and your involvement really with the Milwaukee Bucks.
There's not a lot to say. I was very fortunate. I've had a lot of luck in my life. Luckiest thing I did was meeting my wife. Second luckiest thing I had was working at York Capital. The best group of people I ever worked with. And it wasn't just Jamie and Dan and my other partners there who were fantastic, just great group of people. And I got to do something I loved for a long time before I moved on. We could talk about that. But the Bucks was just a side bet. Sometimes you get lucky in life. And there was an opportunity that the Bucks were for sale. A couple of hedge fund guys at the time, Wes Edens and Mark Lazary, were looking to buy the team. They were looking for more capital. They reached out to Jamie, see if he wanted to put in some capital. Jamie became the third owner, and I helped Jamie evaluate that. As part of that, Jamie wasn't a basketball guy. It ended up that he said, "Oh, do you want to own a piece of the team too?" So I ended up, buying a minority stake in the team, and I've had a front row seat to a really great, 13-year run now. If I look at the original email I sent Jamie about, I said I thought we could double our money. We bought the team for the mid $500 million, and I think the last valuation was something in the mid $3.5 billion was the last sale. So that worked out a lot better.
The spring of
Right,
growth.
and you had to look at that from the intellectual side. You can't just be like, it's a basketball team. I like basketball. I want to
Yeah, but it
invest
was
in
hard. No, but
Right.
we had a lot of great analogies in that email, which is like, it's like beachfront property in Nantucket. They're 30 homes. They're not building any new ones. And, but we didn't, and we really liked the idea that was right when Netflix was coming and streaming. We thought, listen, live sports might be the only thing that advertisers are going to pay for. We had a couple of good thoughts, but at the end of the day, we did it a little bit because we thought it was going to be fun. Okay, we're not going to lie. And we never...
There's a human side to it. Yeah.
And by the way...
They didn't even have Giannis back then.
By the way, no, and we thought Jabari Parker was going to be the answer. But let me be very clear. I have no decision-making authority. The guys who run the team, especially John Horst, who's the GM who just signed to an extension, has done an amazing job. The coaches, everyone's there. But I've had access by... I know Jamie and Wes very well, and I've seen a lot. I've given advice. Sometimes it's listened to, sometimes it's not. But it's been. I loved sports growing up, so it was every. I think every kid's dream is to play in the NBA. The joke is, the Jewish boy rarely makes it. So at least I got to own a small piece of something and get a ring, and being there the night we won the championship with my son and my friends. It was a nice confluence because Jamie was there and some of the other partners bought a piece of it, and we all got to celebrate that together about 5 years after I left York. And that kind of it's one of the things that's kept us together since we all left York.
Sports bonds people. That's what it is.
What else can I tell you?
I want to say that I want to know really what was more an exciting experience, the Yeshiva League championship winning or the Milwaukee Bucks championship?
I was asked this question at my 50th birthday by my brother, but he asked a different one. He said, was the best sports night of your life, like when my junior Frisch team won at Madison Square Garden, or when the Bucks won the championship, or when my son Danny was playing for Frisch with Max Sackheim. The team came back from 16 down in the second half to win Globerman. And one day you'll understand that the best sports night of my life was watching my son win that championship.
Wow.
And
Danny's a true Talmud Chacham now too, by the way.
But being there with Danny from Milwaukee was a close second. And my own, first of all, I was not a big contributor. I scored 2 points that game.
Whoa.
We won.
We won by how much?
We won by 1.
Okay. There it was.
We know where the difference came from.
But yes, and Danny is a big Talmud Chacham who I'm very, very, very proud of.
Shout out to Danny. We'll get him listening.
Yeah, I've been able to learn from his expertise in Judaism before. So it's geschmack.
This was great. I keep telling stories. I don't even have to talk about my life after York or anything else. What else? Let's go.
Yeah, we don't want to keep you too long.
I got as much time as you want. We're good.
I want to hone in on one aspect of York. You were there for a while, and you mentioned how even jumping in there was a decision where you turned down Oxif as like what was going on. Why did you stay there for so long? And progressing through, did you have other offers coming out that you had that were very shiny that you just said no to? Like, what was that process staying there for so long?
Well, we could do an hour on this alone. When I got to Lehman Brothers, I had a lot of men. People are like, who is your, people ask me, I need a mentor. And I'm a very big believer in life that I'm kind of against mentors because I think there are very few people that people think, oh, he's a mentor. You got to base your whole life on them. And there are very few people that I think, their whole life, I want to live like them. And the way I've always approached life from a young age is that I think you could learn something from everybody. Almost every single person that's in my life, there is something that they do, or a talent, or a skill, or an emotion they have that they do better than me. And you try to learn that from them. And so, when I started working at Lehman Brothers, they actually assigned me a mentor. So I had no choice. This guy, Mike Konigsberg, was an amazing guy. And, he was, in his mid-30s, and we would meet once a month for lunch in the cafeteria. And I asked him that question. I said, Mike, you've been here, you came out of college and you worked here for 13 years. Why didn't you ever leave? And he said, well, listen, I think there are two approaches to, how you could build a career in finance or in anything. He's like, number one is you could get yourself very valuable. And in our business, the door, people will come knocking on the door and they'll offer you a lot of money to leave. You're a valuable seat, you're a contributor, you can make money. People want that. And you could be a free agent. You could always be a hired gun. And, it's like an old reference was like David Cohn, who was a pitcher who kept jumping from team to team, just getting these short, long, big money contracts. He's like, or the way I think about it is that you could find one place that you really agree with their culture, the people, the way they do it, that you could buy into it. And for him, it was Lehman Brothers, and say, I'm going to spend my entire career here, and they're going to know how loyal I am because I'm never going to leave. And it's going to cost me some money in the short term, right? Because if you jump, usually like you're making something. So how does someone get you to jump to a new job? The headhunter goes, you're making, $1 million. I'll offer you $1.5 million or whatever the numbers are. And so I was willing to sacrifice, but very soon it becomes very apparent that I'm a loyal person, and your bosses recognize that. So then you become the guy that they're going to overpay to stay. And even better, when things are going poorly and they have to let people go, or you're the guy that they're gonna trust. And that was my strategy. That's what Mike told me his strategy was. And I was like, okay, so I learned he was my mentor for loyalty. I said, okay, this makes sense. Find a place, if you believe in it, like jumping to the next, what did you say? Shiny thing?
Yeah, shiny object.
Shiny objects are terrible, okay? They're the worst thing out there.
Grass is always greener.
Grass is always greener. It's one of these things that, I learned that last night. I always thought back to Mike, how he used to tell me this. And so when, I could open up all the secrets, I guess, now. So I'm at York and we start, and I get off to a great start. Okay, great start. I literally, the first 3 investment recommendations I made all worked. Okay, and right away, like Jamie's like, oh yeah, see, I heard this genius kid. It was luck. Okay, you know how many times in my career I got 3 in a row right fast, like twice. Okay, that first time. So, best advice is get lucky. Okay, do work, put yourself in position, but everyone needs a little bit of luck. But then, so I started having a nice career, and 2000 was good, and it was a great story for another time about the compensation talk at the end of the first half a year, and then second year, 2001, things were great, got paid nicely, and then 2002 happens. And 2002 was a tough year.
The bubble burst.
Yeah, it was a tough year, and there was, the distress, like WorldCom, and it was a mess, and Enron, and there was a lot of fraud, and it was after 9/11, things slowed down, and York, we had our first losing year in a long time. Okay, and we didn't make money, and we were down. And our assets, which had grown to like $1.1 billion, I think shrunk to like $700 million, both because of losses and also because people pulling money. But we didn't have a terrible year. And, I was very thankful. Jamie paid me, he actually gave me an increase, a bonus that year, instead of taking it out of his own pocket, paying me, because he's like, you did everything right and you had a great year. So I'm going to reward you because it means a lot more to give you some more money than me. And that was very meaningful to me, because he could have easily said, like, and I learned how to treat people from Jamie. And, I got a call like about a few days after bonus season from, I'm not going to say which firm, from another firm, big hedge fund. And, and guy I knew, and he said, okay, you got to talk to my boss, because, you have friends or colleagues, like, he knows about you. And so, this boss, I met with his boss, and he said, okay, I'm like, one, bringing a York ship is sinking, it's going the wrong way. You come off now. And, I remember he offered me, he's like, I'll give you a 2-year, $3 million, contract. And I was like, which was, a lot more money than I was making, and nothing's guaranteed. And this was guaranteed, and it was great. And I was like, oh my God, that's, that's really great. And, I said, I'll think about it. And I went home, and like a lot of other things, I talked to my wife about it. And she said, what do you think? I said, I don't know. I think we're building something really special here. I think we're building something really, really special here. And, and I said, this is nice and shiny, but like, once I do this, I'm the hired gun. If things go bad over there, they're going to think, all right, if I jump to go there, I'll jump to go somewhere else, and there's no loyalty. I said, I don't know. I said, I'm going to say thank you, but no thank you. And I said, thank you, but no thank you.
That's so meaningful.
And then the next year in 2003, we killed it. We made a fortune of money, and our returns were great. And it did not take very long for us to be a much bigger and better and well-known firm than this firm that tried to hire me. And so the only other interesting time that I never ever talked about, I'm probably not going to do that, is when years later I did accept an invitation to go to Stevie Cohen's house when he was trying to hire me, more just to see the shark and the formaldehyde and his house.
Get
and
a
talk
shark?
to him. Oh yeah, it was.
That's like Despicable Me.
He had a beautiful house. And it was also out of respect, and I talked to him, and you know what? He's a really great guy. I'll never forget this. And we had this conversation, and I kept telling him, and it was clear how much I loved York. And even from the beginning, I said, I'm coming just to talk to you because a guy who used to run marketing for York is then working for him. He laughed, so he's like, you gotta hire Michael. You gotta hire Michael. And you know, I think one of the things that Steve believes in doing is hiring the most talented people. So, and we finished this conversation. We spoke for like an hour and a half in his living room. And at the end of the day, he said to me, "What is it going to take for you to leave? What's the number?"
It's like an NBA player over here.
And I said, I looked at him and I thought about it, and I said, honestly, I said, I don't know. I said, and I'm afraid there is a number. I said, so, and I looked at him, I said, so I don't know. And he looked at me, he said, you know what? He's like, you're a really good guy. He's like, and it sounds like you have a great relationship with your partners there and everything's great. He's like, so I'm going to do you a favor. He's like, and I'm not going to put the number on the table, and I'm not going to do this to you. And I said, he's like, because I think I could get you. And I said, I don't think you want to come. I said, he's like, I think you're a good guy. I think you're happy where you are. I think you should keep doing what you're doing. He said, but you have my number, and if anything ever changes, give me a call. And I thought it was just a really good experience. And, you know, because everyone's got a number, you know, and I thought it was actually really special that he, you know, he understood when I told him when I was coming in, I really didn't want to leave, but it was out of respect, because when, you know, one of the, you know, godfathers in the industry calls and wants to speak to you, you go talk to him. And this was, you know, I think this was probably 2007. I'd been at York for probably about 7 years at the time. After that, those are the only, you know, I never picked up the phone. I mean, I was a partner. It was like, you know, things were going well. It was more about making sure that we kept our team together and people I want. But yeah, I mean, it was once you get past the first couple of years and realize you're in a good place. You know, it's, you know, Jamie was really one of my mentors. I mean, Dan Schwartz, who was their CIO, told me he gave me a great lesson one time. And one of the guys who worked for me blew us up in a stock. We lost a lot of money. It was something that I wanted us to get out of in advance. And I guess, you know, we didn't. Jamie didn't listen to me, or he gave, you know, whatever. And I walked around, I was moping for like a day or day and a half. And finally, Dan called me into the conference room and he said, listen to me. He's like, you already won. Okay, you already won in life. You already won. Okay, and things are going to happen that are bad, and you know, and that's it. So you could either, you know, understand how lucky you are, and you know, you gotta be a little better. You cannot wear this, you know, on your sleeve, and you got to move on. And that was really great advice. But the best advice I got from Jamie, and Jamie was really good at distilling things into, like, you know, little sayings very often. Like,
oh, pep talk.
No, but he always, like, we had, you know, he would say, like, what did he say? He said, when you're crying, you should be buying, you know, which is what we talked about. Like, when things are going poorly, that's usually, you know, when you're yelling, you should be selling. You know, and I remember early on in my career, it was my second year there. I think it was my second year there, or my first full year. And I had a great year, and he paid me a bonus that way exceeded my expectations. I'm like, this is amazing. I can't wait to get home and tell my wife about this. And I felt great, right? That I did the work. I killed myself. I was the first guy in. I was really, the plan was working out. Everything made sense. And so I came in the next day, and, you know, and had a good day. And then one of the guys in the office said, hey, you want to go get drinks afterwards? I'd like to talk to you. I'm like, okay, great. So I'm not going to say his name. He'd been there for a few years before me, older guy. And we went out for drinks, and he's like, so how do they treat you? And, like, it's this really weird thing in the hedge fund world. You're not really supposed to say what you got paid, or, you know, it's like, keep it to yourself. Like, everyone has their own deal in life. And I said, I was very happy. but I didn't say, I was going to get paid. I said, how about you? And he said, and then he said, he told me the number. Okay. And this guy did not have a good year. Okay. I thought he was better than him. He didn't work as hard as I did. And his bonus was bigger than mine. Okay. And it was like a gut shot. I'm like, wait a minute. Like this guy got paid. Jamie, Dan, they value him more than me. And I was like, well, it's and he said, yeah, but I don't think they value me enough. And I don't know, maybe it's time to start thinking about moving on. I'm like, I didn't even hear anything else he said. I was just like, and then I went home that night and I was like so upset. Okay. And, and I'm like, which by the way, think about lesson in life. Before I knew what this guy was getting paid, I was the happiest guy in the world.
Right.
Then I found out what this guy's getting paid. I'm miserable. And I go home and I really had a bad night's sleep. I get into work. I'm starting to work. And I guess I looked like I was in a bad mood that day. And I was probably pretty curt and I wasn't, answering questions. And finally, Jamie called me off the desk and we leave the desk and he says, what's going on? And I said, nothing. Honestly, it's just a personal thing. He says, no, tell me. Come on, we're very close. Like, tell me what's going on. And I said, listen, please don't take this as a complaint because I don't like, one of the things I don't do is we don't fight about money. I'm not complaining. You treated me very well. But I'm not going to lie. I said, I'm a little bit down because I was talking to this guy. And if he's telling the truth, it's like, you paid him more than you paid me. And I'm like, what kind of message is that sending to me? And, and he looks at me and he says, okay. He's like, I forget how young you are and stupid or something like that. He's like, I'll explain this to you one time and please understand it. And he said, you will never be happy in life if you're always looking at someone else's allotment in life. Okay? There's always going to be someone that doesn't work as hard and is successful, and someone might be making more money than you and doesn't deserve it. Someone might have a nicer house or prettier wife. There's always going to be, you could always be upset looking at other people. He's like, you have to learn how to be just happy with what you got. Were you happy on Monday? And I said, yes. He's like, then you should be happy today. And it all made sense, okay? I said, thank you. That was a really good lesson. And I start walking out the door. He says, but because I like you, I'm going to tell you the other part of the story. He's like, he was not lying to you fully, okay? But what he left out of the story is that we gave him extra money because we told him that, his career was basically coming to an end here and he should look for another job. And the reason we told him that is because we realized that you're doing a great job and you're going to be that much better. And that's what the potential is. He's like, you don't always have all the facts. But the big thing that I took away from that is that, for the rest of my life, I was really I just thought about what would make me happy. What are the things that I needed to be happy, and that helped me in my decision when to leave the firm and when to change things up. But you have to be you'll never be happy in life if you're always looking at someone else, because someone else you could always say has it better than you and are deserved. So.
Izahu Ashir, Somech V'chalko.
Was about to say that? That's crazy.
Beat you to it.
That's chemistry right there.
Beat you to it. Beat you to it.
Who, for those who don't speak Hebrew, who is wealthy? He who is happy with his share. And that's a proven story. And that, I think, is the greatest lesson. Just for me and you, honestly. We're here at 10:15 at Thursday night, and there's honestly no place I'd rather be.
This is great. 100%. This is great. I think
I want to ask real quick because I know we're running out of time, but
you can keep going.
I really want to.
Then I was late. The night is yours. I mean, I don't know if anyone's going to listen for an hour.
We might get kicked out of the studio.
That's okay. We could go till they throw us out. I got nothing going on.
So one thing
you said you're buying me dinner when we're done, right?
Oh yeah.
Trust me, the Golan will stay open for you.
They'll be open.
But I really wanted to know is about giving back to the community, because I know that's so much of what you do. And Chaim Zach, I'm actually texting me because I told him I was interviewing. He said, make sure to ask him, number one, what do you do? What do you do for the community? And also, how is it that you decide where to invest your time, where to invest your money?
Okay. I like talking about this part of it a lot more than there's a great book. I love reading. I think if I could leave, we're talking to the college kids, be a lifelong learner. We talked about this. You said, there's, Ezu Chacham Halamed Mikol Adam, right? I really believe that's true. You can learn from everybody, but you got to keep learning. Like I'm a lifelong learner. I try to get, and reading's the best. Like you just got to keep reading. So there are a lot of books I could talk to you that influenced my life, but one of the most recent books I read was, I think it's called The 5 Different Types of Wealth. It was by an author.
Sahil Bloom. Yeah, I just got it.
I mean,
That's big time, man.
I like that.
Well, I just got it.
We're readers out here.
There we go.
Great book. And he talks about there are 5 different types of wealth, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but
I'll help you out. Let's see if I remember.
Okay, so I think that the 5 different, and the first one is so important. There's time wealth, okay, and then there's mental wealth.
Yeah.
Right? There's physical wealth, which as you get older and your body starts breaking down, you can really appreciate. And then there's like the social or emotional wealth, social wealth. And then there's financial wealth.
100%. Yeah.
Get it? Yeah. Read it? Okay.
100% on the test. Here we go. A+.
But, time wealth is something that, having control of your time, and you guys don't realize it because you're young and you have your whole life in front of you. And how you spend your time during different portions of your life matter. Like the amount of work I did when I was 21 at Lehman Brothers, like I'd be miserable if I was doing that now. And, realizing, when I moved on to the next stage of life, and each stage, like how you want to spend your time. So one of the greatest gifts that I have, and I worked really hard to attain it, is that I have time wealth. I have real control over my time. And that's something that how you use it really impacts how you feel. And one of the things that I found, especially when I left the hedge fund world and just started managing my own family office and having control, and not when I had $1 of money from someone else, I worked like crazy. Because another lesson that Jamie taught me very early on is he said to me, he's like, never forget, it's not just we're managing $300 million or $500 million and we're trying to make as much money. He's like, someone worked really hard for this money and they've entrusted it to you. Okay, so we have to work to our fullest extent because they trusted us with this money, and we're now going to try to do as well as we can. And that always sat with me, and it became a weakness for me because I wasn't ever able to really mail it in. And as long as I was managing someone else's money, I only knew one way, and it was really to be super fully engaged. And that's one of the reasons, amongst other, that eventually I left. But part of it was I wanted to be able to spend more time giving back and being involved in the community. And I don't really like to, I don't like to tell anyone how they should spend their time. I think unlike when it comes to with charitable giving or spending time, but there has to be, to me, one of the biggest things I'm involved in is Sinai Schools, which is a special needs school for children in the metropolitan area. And I've been involved as the president for 6 years, and I've been on the executive board for, I think, close to 20 years now. And for me, the most exciting non-sports time in my life is, really the birth of my children. And, when there's that scary moment when the baby comes out and until the doctor says everything's great, and then you have this, you're like, this is amazing. But there's that scary moment, you just don't know. And, Ariane and I are blessed with 5 incredible children. My oldest daughter just got married a few weeks ago, Rebecca, to Manny, who's really great. Welcome to our family, Manny, if you listen to this ever. And that hit me, and for other reasons, there are families, and these special needs kids are wonderful kids, and but they pose challenges. And if I could give back, and people often give back, and I'm not knocking it, people that suffer from cancer and survive want to give back to it. That's great. And if there's something that touches you in a certain way and you want to do it, that's great. For me, it was the exact opposite. I found that I didn't have some of the struggles that are associated with families that have a member of their family that have developmental disabilities or special needs. So let me give back as almost kind of like a thank you, and try to throw myself into how to make life easier for other people that do have these struggles. And there's an incredible team at Sinai, and Sam Fishman, who's the director, and Mark Karasik, who is one of the founders and family friend, and Rabbi Rothwax and his mother, Laurette, who ran it for many years. And we really did an amazing thing in terms of reshaping how affordable it was for people to send their kids there by challenging the legal system and getting the government to cover a lot of the costs, which are prohibitively expensive because the student to teacher ratio is very low. But again, that resonated for me. So it was easy for me not only to give my dollars, but also to give my time. And I think, listen, any one of your listeners, all of your listeners, if they have an iPhone and time and they're at college and things like that, you got to give back. I mean, giving is so much better than receiving in many ways. Like my dad, who, again, I had so many mentors. My mom, my dad. My dad always used to tell me, you don't want to take anything from anyone. You don't want to owe anyone to anyone. Just want to give. You just don't want to be that. And you really do feel good. And if there's something that you feel passionate about, just go with it. But yeah, I think that there is my kids, when I talk to them about what they should do with their lives, and I try to say I want them to be productive members of society and leave the world a better place than where we got there. And there's so many different ways that you could do that. It's not up for me to tell you, which way to do it. So I don't know. That's my tag on that.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And quick Twitter before we wrap up. Just on.
I hope you're giving it because I'm not giving it.
Oh no, I'll give it to you. I'll give it to you. It's on actually.
It's a partial. You were ready for that.
No, it's just something I like is that what is matana is a present, but the root is to give, because the real present in life, like you were saying, is giving.
Wow.
Rev Danny Weinberger is going to be impressed with me. I did it because I know he's listening.
There we go.
What's your last question?
There we go. The last question always on the podcast is, what do you learn from your industry that applies to everyone? But we did that.
We're not going to
so why don't you
learn how to fail. So
why don't you give us takeaways for Jewish professional in the workplace today? What are the final takeaways you want to leave them with?
For the Jewish professional in the workplace today, look, something that I took very seriously, and I think you do. It's whether you're, people are going to know you're Jewish, okay? You're not going to hide from that. It's something that you fit in and you do your job and you do the right way. But whether you like it or not, you are to a lot of people going to be this is how the Jewish people do it in the workplace. If you're and there is a responsibility that all of you have to do things the right way. And that's the most important thing in my mind is, doing things morally, doing things ethically, find that gray line and stay far away from it. That's just, you gotta know what your moral stand is. And I know, to me, I'm a big believer. It doesn't matter if it's sports or work or having fun or, you got to give it your all. If you're doing something in a half-ass way, I don't know if I'm supposed to say that in a podcast, what are you bothering? What are you doing? Why are you spending? It's the value of time. So if there's something you're doing, if it's work, if it's if it's charity, if it's sports, just be the best at it that you could be and work really, really hard. And if you get to a point where you find that you don't want to work really hard in that job, you should then ask yourself the question, am I in the wrong job? Because there was not one moment in my entire career that I questioned, was I working too hard? When, if you ask a lot of my extended family members, they would say, Moshe's working too hard. It's crazy. I loved it. And it was my responsibility. And there was I would wake up at night. I would wake up in the morning. It was the last thing I would do. Again, I'm not telling you this is the best way to live life. And, you probably should have more balance and that's one of the reasons why I ended up leaving and managing my family office, because I couldn't figure out at the end on how to balance everything. So I don't think I have it all figured out. You have other people that come on the show and probably did a much better job during their peak career, what they're doing of balancing things. I couldn't figure that out. But I will tell you that every day that I worked and everything I did, I just like to go for it and just do it, do it the right way, because people are going to judge you on the effort you put in, the process you put in, and as a Jew in the workforce, you're representing everyone. It's what Elliot talks about, the YU Max. You do represent the Jewish people, right? Mm-hmm. And YU represent. If you're going for an interview from YU, be prepared, be respectful, be on time. Dress the right way. But no, of course, never compromise on your values. Right. Never like that. Like, and I've had this conversation with a lot of my friends, who themselves are in the business or have kids that are starting to go into business. I've talked to Chaim Zakheim about this a lot when we were younger about, he had it where like people have to travel and they can get stuck places for Shabbos. And, for me, I had a professor in Harvard Business School. His name was Clay Christensen. Okay. Very famous. He wrote the book Innovator's Dilemma. He was a very strongly devout Mormon. He still is Mormon. And I remember he told us this story. I felt he was talking directly to me when he was telling the story. And someone told me it's on the internet somewhere, so because he's told it a couple times. But when he was working, I think he was working at BCG or McKinsey or one of the consulting firms, he was a young guy and there was a project that was due, and his boss said, all right, listen, we have a big presentation to, make up a company craft on Monday. We got to come in on Sunday, 2:15, so we just go over the presentation one time. So he said, and he tells the story so much better than I'm going to tell it, but he basically said something like, I'm sorry, I made a commitment. I spend Sundays, my holy day, I spend it in the church. I can't work on Sunday. And the guy's like, well, this is an extenuating circumstance. And then he's like, I'm really sorry, I can't. And the guy's like, you're an idiot. And he goes back and comes to the team. And then, he says, all right, okay, good news, Clay. He's like, we're going to meet on Saturday. And he's like, sorry. I said, I made a commitment to my wife and my family that I'm not going to work Saturdays. Okay, now, and the guy's like, what are you talking about? We need this. We have to get a team. You're important. Now, Clay was great. I'm sure what he understated was how important he was to the team, even as a young guy, or else, that's come back to what I said, make yourself important. And then people figure these things out. And then finally the guy came back and he said to him, okay, great. Can we meet on, Friday at 2:15? And, Clay's like, yeah, of course. And, but his postscript to the story was, it would have been really easy for him to say, okay, just this one time. It's an extenuating circumstance. I'm going to work, I'll come in on Sunday, I'll skip church or whatever it is, or I'll skip family time. And what you guys will all start to realize as you go through life is that life is just a series of one extenuating circumstance after another. And there will always be like just this one important thing and the most important deal or the most important guest or the most important game or whatever it is. And if you decide you're going to cut back or not hold to your values one time, then it's going to become all the time. Yeah. And if you just say, I'm going to stick to my values 100% of the time, then it's 100% of the time. And if you're surrounded by the right people that you're working with, and if you've proven, that you're really important and worth it, then what I found is that people are going to, there's not one person that when they were making the decision about whether or not to allocate money to us at Your Capital ever thought, are there Orthodox Jews that are working? No, they looked at our work product. They looked at how we did it. They looked at how we acted, how responsible we were. So I guess that's my long-winded quick note of be the best you could be if you're going to do it. Make sure that people recognize your value. And the only way you can do that is actually make yourself valuable. So don't just do your assigned tasks. Figure out more and more ways to make, don't want to get hit by the bus guy. That's an important thing. And at the end of the day, you represent us. So whatever your values are, and I'm not telling you what your values should be. I'm not opining on that. You could, to certain people, it could be, they could work until, a minute before Shabbos. Everyone's got to figure out what it is. But whatever it is, make sure you know those lines very, very clearly to yourself, what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. And then, just stick to it, because you break once and then it just, for one extenuating circumstance, there's just going to continue to be extenuating circumstances. And if you just stick to it, be true to yourself. And then, when it's time to get married, let emotion dictate that decision. And,
there we go.
And every other decision you make, keep emotion, tucked away and just be logical about it.
Wow.
Moshe,
Yep.
I can't tell you how grateful I am for you coming on.
That was
Oh,
great.
no, I had a lot of
That was
fun.
great.
This was
that
really
was great.
good.
That was really fun.
So we're gonna have 14 people listening to this.
We'll try to bring that up to 15. if we,
We got at least 1,000. I mean, maybe 2.
No, it's enjoyable. No, so that's it. So just there are no shortcuts. Embrace failure, and sorry about Luca.
Appreciate it. Thanks everyone for listening. Make sure to subscribe. Thank you to Ashley. Thank you to JB. Thank you to Josh. Thank you to our whole team. And thank you, Moshe, for coming on. And most importantly, thank you to our listeners. You guys are the ones that drive the podcast forward. Thanks again. Like and subscribe. See you on the next one.